The scent of expensive whiskey and something sharper, something metallic, clung to the air in the presidential suite. Yu Xianxian's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the oppressive silence. Sprawled on the plush Oberson rug was the man whose face was plastered across every financial magazine in the country. Liu Haoshan, CEO of the formidable Liu Corporation. His tailored suit was immaculate, but his face was a ghastly shade of pale, his lips tinged with an alarming blue. His chest was unnervingly still. Her training as the Grand Empress Hotel's most capable manager screamed at her to call an ambulance, to follow protocol. But another, newer instinct of bizarre awareness had taken root in her mind weeks ago hissed a different command. This wasn't just a medical emergency. This was a plot point. He has a severe, unlisted allergy to single malt scotch. A line from a story file she'd somehow accessed flashed in her mind. Anaphylactic shock. Respiratory failure is imminent. She believed, an editor trapped inside a sprawling, cliché-ridden romance novel. And her job was to push the narrative forward. Panic warred with a strange sense of duty. Protocol wouldn't work. The script demanded a specific, dramatic intervention. She knelt beside him, her movements clumsy with adrenaline. The trope was as old as time. A moment of forced intimacy designed to forge an unbreakable bond. Hesitantly, she tilted his head back, pinched his nose, and covered his cold lips with her own. The first breath she pushed into his lungs felt like a violation, a desperate act of creation. The second was steadier. His skin was cool, his lips surprisingly soft. She pressed her ear to his chest. Nothing. She began chest compressions, the rhythmic pressure a stark contrast to the chaos in her mind. 1, 2, 3, 4 on the next breath. His eyes shot open. They weren't hazy or grateful. They were black, sharp, and utterly furious. He seized her wrist in a grip of steel, his gaze pinning her in place. "Who are you?" His voice was a low, dangerous rasp. "How did you know?" Her mind went blank. She couldn't very well say she'd read his character bio. As she floundered, a glowing blue text box materialized in her peripheral vision, a feature of this strange new reality. Mission. Earn Liu Haoshan's trust. Confess your love. The words were an absurd, impossible command. But failure, she instinctively knew, was not an option. She squeezed her eyes shut and blurted out the only line the story would accept. Because I love you." The words tasted like ash in her mouth, flimsy and ridiculous. The pressure on her wrist didn't lessen, but the fury in his eyes receded, replaced by something far more unsettling. A flicker of analytical intrigue. He searched her face, his gaze lingering on her trembling lips as if trying to deconstruct a puzzle. The corner of his mouth twitched, a shadow of a smirk. "Is that so?" he murmured, releasing her. The words were not an acceptance, but an acknowledgement, a chilling opening move in a game she didn't understand. He rose to his feet, straightening his cuffs as if he hadn't just been moments from death. He didn't thank her. He simply watched her, his expression unreadable, setting a complex and dangerous foundation for everything that was to come. A week later, the story had taken a cruel turn. Yu Xianxian was no longer the posed hotel manager, a housekeeper, her crisp suit replaced with a drab, ill-fitting uniform. The narrative had demoted her, and she was forced to play along. She stood with a silver tray in the hotel's exclusive rooftop restaurant, the picture of subservience. At the best table, framed by the glittering city skyline, sat Liu Haoshan. He looked just as powerful, just as remote. But beside him was the story's requisite rival, Chuan Qi, a pristine heiress dripping in diamonds and condescension. "You," Liu Haoshan said without looking at her, his voice cutting through the quiet murmur of the restaurant. "Pour the wine." The single word was a slap, He knew her name. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot flush creeping up her neck. She felt the eyes of her former colleagues on her back. Stepping forward, she picked up the bottle of expensive Bordeaux, her hands thankfully steady. It's just a scene, she reminded herself. A bitter mantra. He's the male lead, she's the antagonist. I'm just playing my part. Be careful, dear. She chirped, her smile a slash of red lipstick. That's a 1982 Petrus. It costs more than your annual salary. Xion poured the ruby liquid into their glasses without a single tremor, her face a blank mass. But inside, the small, defiant part of her felt the sting, and it felt terrifyingly real. The chapter ended. When the next one began, Liu Heotian was gone, vanished. It was as if his entire storyline had been deleted. Xion was reinstated as manager. The humiliating week as a housekeeper dissolving like a bad dream. For a month, life was blessedly, boringly normal. Then she saw him. He was striding through the ground lobby, flanked by a different set of assistants, radiating an aura of power that was even more frigid and intimidating than Liu Heotian's. He wore a charcoal grey suit, his hair styled differently. But it was him. The same sharp jaw, the same piercing dark eyes. Relief, sharp and potent, flooded her chest. Mr. Liu, she called out, her voice betraying a hint of desperation as she hurried to intercept him. He stopped. His entourage stopped. He turned his head slowly, his gaze sweeping over her with utter blankness. It was the look one gives a stranger. Or worse, a piece of furniture. You have the wrong person, he said, his voice clipped and colder than she remembered. It lacked Liu Heotian's resonant timbre. My name is Lengtingen. Xion froze, the blood draining from her face. Lengtingen, CEO of the rival Tianheng Group, a different name, a different life. The memory of her lips on his, of the raw life she had breathed back into him, felt like a phantom limb. The system must have glitched. Their encounter, the confession, the humiliation, was it all just a bug in the narrative? The hurt was so sharp and unexpected it stole her breath. As she stood there, reeling from the emotional whiplash, her professional rival, Manager Lin, glided to her side, a saccharine smile on her face. Xion, are you bothering our distinguished guest? Lin murmured, her voice just loud enough for Lengtingen and his assistants to hear. She placed a proprietary hand on Xian's arm. Mr. Leng is our most important client this quarter. We can't afford any more incidents, especially not like the one that happened in the presidential suite last month. Lengtingen's eyes narrowed, a flicker of something unreadable passing through them before he turned away, dismissing her completely. Xion was left standing in the middle of the lobby, trapped between a man who held her past in a face that no longer recognized it and a colleague eager to use that past to destroy her future. The tiramisu sat on the silver platter like a jewel, a perfect, cocoa-dusted square of culinary art. But as Xion watched the server carry it toward Lengtingen's table, a line of text from the script she'd been forced to edit flashed in her mind. The dessert, a sweet vessel for bitter revenge. Her blood ran cold. The plot, the new pastry chef's unrequited love and subsequent grudge. She hadn't connected the dots until this very second. Lengtingen picked up his fork. Without a second thought, Xion bolted from her post, weaving through the crowded hotel restaurant. She reached his table just as the tines of his fork were about to pierce the delicate dessert. In a move fueled by pure panic, she snatched the spoon from his dessert setting, scooped a massive bite of the tiramisu, and shoved it into her own mouth. A bitter, chemical aftertaste instantly coated her tongue, a stark contrast to the sweet mascarpone. The room fell silent. Lengtingen's hand froze mid-air. His face, usually a mask of cold indifference, sharpened with disbelief, then hardened into pure contempt. What? He said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. do you think you are doing? Xion couldn't speak, her throat constricting around the drugged mouthful. She just shook her head, trying to swallow the evidence. Spit it out, he commanded. When she didn't, he scoffed, a cruel sound that echoed in the mortified silence. A manager of a 5-star hotel, stealing food off a guest's plate. How utterly pathetic. You pushed the platter away as if it were contaminated. The dessert is ruined. Your manners are disgusting. Get out of my sight. Each word was a public slap. The whispers of the surrounding staff and guests were a tide of humiliation threatening to drown her. Cheeks burning, she fled to the kitchens. The bitter taste a grim reminder of her failure. Her punishment was delivered 10 minutes later. She was to serve him supper in his presidential suite. Alone, the opulent room felt like a gilded cage. He sat at the enormous dining table, eating with a cold, detached precision that made the clinking of his silverware sound like a ticking clock. Xion stood stiffly by the wall, feeling less like a hotel manager and more like a prisoner awaiting sentencing. A soft knock interrupted the tense silence. Xion opened the door to find Bei Yanchu, the hotel's new star pastry chef, her face a perfect mask of concern. President Leng, I heard about the incident, she said, her eyes flicking to Xion with a flicker of triumph. I'm so sorry my dessert caused such a disturbance. I brought a replacement. Something simple, to help you settle. Leng Ting gave a curt nod, his gaze never leaving his plate. Leave it. It was her, the culprit. Xion watched Bei Yanchu set down a small plate of macarons, her heart a tangled knot of relief and indignation. Leng Ting was safe, but she had been caught in the crossfire of a petty, dangerous scheme, publicly shamed for an act of protection he would never understand. Later that night, as Xion was preparing to finally leave her office, she saw Bei Yanchu walking down the hall, heading back toward the presidential suite with another covered tray. The revenge plot wasn't over. A new wave of dread washed over her. She couldn't let the story play out as written. Acting on instinct, she called out, Chef Bei, could you help me with this inventory? The door to the walk-in pantry is stuck again. Bei Yanchu's annoyance was clear, but she couldn't refuse a direct request from a manager. She followed Xion into the supply workroom. As soon as the chef was inside, Xion slammed the heavy door, turned the key in the lock, and sagged against the wall, her heart hammering. The click of the lock echoed with a dreadful finality. She had just trapped the antagonist, but in her haste, she'd forgotten one crucial detail. It was the only exit from this wing of the staff quarters after midnight. She was trapped too. A low groan filtered through the wall from the adjacent suite. Leng Ting suite. Worried the drug had somehow reached him after all, she used her master key on the server's entrance connecting the pantry to his rooms. She found him not unconscious, but coiled with a tense, feverish energy. His shirt was soaked with sweat, his jaw clenched, his knuckles white as he gripped the arm of a chair. He'd eaten the macarons. What now? He bit out, his voice strained. He clearly thought she was there to pester him further. You have to burn it out, she said, the words tumbling out before she could second-guess them. To drug it's a stimulant. Fighting it will only make it worse. You have to release the energy. He stared at her, his eyes clouded with pain and suspicion. What are you talking about? Devil training, she blurted, recalling a brutal fitness regimen from an old movie. It's the only way. Get on the floor. Now. To her shock, he complied, his movements rigid as he lowered himself onto the plush carpet. Push-ups, she commanded, her voice gaining a confidence she didn't feel. Go until you can't feel your arms, he began, his form perfect despite the tremors running through his body. 1, 2, 10, 20. Xion knelt beside him, her own fear pushed aside by a strange, fierce focus. Breathe out on the push, she coached. Don't hold your breath. Match my rhythm. In out, he grunted, sweat dripping from his forehead onto the rug. But he kept going. When his arms finally gave out, she had him flip over. Crunches. Now planks. Hold it. Focus on the burn. Let it consume everything else. They worked for what felt like hours. A grueling, impromptu boot camp in the most luxurious suite in the city. The air grew thick with the metallic scent of their shared exertion. Amid the ragged breaths and strained muscles, a strange connection formed, a raw, unspoken partnership forged in a shared struggle for control. His initial skepticism had melted into a grudging, focused determination. He was no longer the arrogant CEO, and she was no longer the clumsy manager. They were just two people, pushing through the pain together. Finally, he collapsed onto his back, chest heaving, a frantic energy in his eyes replaced by pure exhaustion. The worst had passed. A quiet moment of relief settled between them, fragile as spun glass. Then, a cold, emotionless electronic tone chimed in the air, audible only to her. Mission: prevent the male lead from being drugged. Status: failed. The target consumed the secondary drugged item. Plot integrity compromised. Punishment protocol initiated. Yuzi Yishionjion is confined to the Neverland Hotel. Duration: indefinite. The fragile hope that had begun to blossom in her chest shattered into a million icy shards. She stared at the man panting on the floor, the man she had just saved, and felt the walls of the hotel close in around her like a tomb. The whispers followed Yu Xion through the grand lobby of the starlight Grand Hotel like a venomous mist. They curled from behind potted palms where two housekeepers stood, and hissed from the concierge desk where the staff pretended to sort mail. The words were always the same, a corrosive blend of envy and contempt. Did you hear? Manager Yu is resigning. Of course, after landing Mr. Leng, she used the oldest trick in the book, a beauty trap. I can't believe the hotel allowed it. She must have promised the board a piece of the pie. Each syllable was a tiny, sharp stone striking her professional pride. She straightened her spine, the clean lines of her manager's uniform feeling less like armor and more like a costume for a part she never wanted to play. Her knuckles were white where she gripped the tablet in her hands. She had poured her soul into this hotel, into earning its prestigious 8-star rating. Now, her success was being written as a tawdry romance subplot. Mr. Zia, the head of guest relations and one of the few colleagues whose gaze didn't slide away from hers, approached with a strained smile. Don't listen to them, Xion. They're just jealous. His eyes, however, held a weary pity that confirmed the rumors were spreading, damaging not just her, but the hotel's reputation. It wasn't her fault, his look seemed to say, but the damage was done. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she saw him standing at the checkout counter. Leng Tingen. He was dressed in a charcoal suit that seemed to absorb the light around him, making him a figure of stark, imposing elegance. His profile was as sharp and cold as the winter morning outside. The night they had spent talking on the balcony, the shared vulnerability under the stars, felt like a distant, fragile dream. She forced herself to walk toward him, maintaining the placid mask of a professional manager. Mr. Leng, I hope your stay was satisfactory. He didn't turn immediately, signing the final bill with a decisive flourish. When he finally faced her, his eyes were devoid of any warmth. They were the eyes of a critic, a judge. Satisfactory is a generous term, Manager Yu. The formal address was a deliberate blow. He slid a platinum card back into his wallet, his movements economical and precise. I've just submitted my final review. The Starlight Grand is an excellent establishment for a certain kind of business, one that understands the value of creative hospitality. The implication was brutally clear. Humiliation burned in her cheeks. Mr. Leng, I assure you, our service standards are unimpeachable. The efforts my staff and I made were purely for your comfort as our guest. Her ghost of a smile, thin and cruel, touched his lips. Your efforts were noted. He leaned in slightly, His voice a low murmur that was for her alone, cutting deeper than any public pronouncement. But let's not pretend this was about anything more than securing a rating. The manager as bait, it's a bold strategy. Unfortunately, it leaves a rather unpleasant aftertaste. He dismissed her, their connection, her genuine feelings, with the detached cynicism of a man who saw the world as a series of transactions. She felt the profound sense of injustice, not just for herself, but for the hotel she loved. "You're wrong," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "The Starlight's integrity isn't for sale." He simply gave a slight, dismissive nod and turned to leave, his assistant already holding the door of a black sedan. As his silhouette disappeared, a crisp, electronic chime sounded in her mind, a familiar interface overlaying her vision. "Congratulations, you have triggered a hidden branch plot. The critic's redemption. Mission: persuade Leng Tingen to amend his review and restore the hotel's 8-star rating. Failure penalty: character deletion. The digital words pulsed with cold, impersonal urgency. Deletion. The word sent a shiver of primal fear through her. But beneath the fear, a spark of defiance ignited. This wasn't just about a game or a plot. This was about her honor. Driven by a surge of adrenaline, she rushed out of the hotel, the cold morning air hitting her face. "Mr. Leng, wait." He had one foot in the car, but he paused, turning his head with an expression of mild annoyance. "Give me 1 hour," she said, her breath fogging in the air. "Let me prove you wrong. Not for the hotel, not for the rating, for the truth." She named a small, unassuming restaurant a few blocks away. A place known not for its Michelin stars but for its honest, heartfelt cooking. "One meal. If you still believe I'm nothing but bait after that, I will personally hand you my resignation." Something in her raw determination must have broken through his armor. After a long, calculating pause, he withdrew his foot from the car and gave a curt nod. 1 hour. The restaurant was cramped and filled with the comforting aroma of simmering broth and fried garlic. Seated across from him in a simple wooden booth, Yu Xion felt the power dynamic shift. Here, stripped of the hotel's luxury, he was just a man, and she was just a woman with something to prove. "I won't apologize for trying to connect with you," she began, her voice steady. "But I need you to know it wasn't a strategy. That night, talking to you, it was real for me. The hotel's rating matters, but my integrity matters more." He listened, his expression unreadable, his fingers steepled before him. He was about to speak when a sudden commotion erupted near their table. "Leng Tingen," a shrill voice cried out. It was Bei Yunchu, her face a mask of fury. In her hand, she held a delicate porcelain plate bearing a tiramisu, but she wielded it like a weapon. "You ruined me. You will pay for what you did." With a guttural scream, she lunged, aiming the dessert directly at Leng Tingen's face. Time seemed to slow. Xion didn't think. She reacted. In a single, fluid motion, she threw herself in front of him, raising her arms as a shield. The tiramisu smashed against her back and shoulder, the cold cream and bitter cocoa powder soaking through the fabric of her uniform. The plate clattered to the floor, shattering. She stood there, breathing heavily, a human shield between him and his assailant. The restaurant fell silent. Behind her, she felt a hand on her arm, firm and steadying. Leng Tingen's touch was unexpectedly warm. He slowly pulled her aside. His eyes, when she met them, were no longer cold. They held a flicker of stunned surprise, of something deeper, something that looked almost like admiration. He looked at the mess on her uniform, and at the furious, panting Bei Yunchu. A dangerous calm settled over his features. He ignored the restaurant owner who was rushing over, his gaze locked on Bei Yunchu. "You want to defeat me?" Leng Tingen's voice was low but carried across the silent room. He gestured lightly toward Yuxion, who was still trying to catch her breath. You think this is how you do it? Your fight isn't with me, it's with her. If your culinary skills are as potent as your anger, prove it. Let her be the judge. The last of the dessert plates had been cleared, leaving a clean expanse of white linen between them. A single candle flame danced in the quiet intimacy of the private dining room, casting flickering shadows that made Leng Tingen's face seem both familiar and entirely new. The meal had been a bridge, spanning the chasm between the fictional narratives and the raw, emerging truth. He had been quiet for the last few minutes, his gaze fixed on her, but it was a gaze that held a universe of unspoken history. The confusion was gone, replaced by a profound, startling clarity. It was the look of a man who had finally come home to himself. I remember everything now, Xion, he said, his voice a low, steady sound that seemed to hold echoes of all the men she had known him to be: the cold CEO, the tormented artist, the gentle amnesiac. But this was different. This was the source code, the prime identity. This was Long Qing, every meeting, every argument, every ridiculous, scripted scenario, and every moment in between that was just us. Yuxian's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic rhythm against the sudden stillness of the room. This was it, the final chapter, the one she hadn't written. He reached across the table, his hand covering hers. His touch was warm, solid, real. All my life, I've been Long Qing, a name tied to a corporation, to expectations, to a path that was never really mine. Then came the system. A persona's a fractured, messy existence where I was playing a part in a game I didn't understand. But in all of that chaos, across every identity, there was one constant. His thumb brushed over her knuckles, sending a tremor through her. You were the only thing that felt real. You were the firmest in my messy life. The words struck her with the force of a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. The firmness in his messy life. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, blurring the candlelight into a soft, golden halo around him. All her struggles, the humiliation, the feeling of being a pawn in a cruel game, it all melted away in the heat of his confession. He saw her, not as a character, not as a mission, but as his anchor. I thought I was going crazy, she whispered, a tear finally escaping and tracing a path down her cheek. I thought I was falling for ghosts, for men who didn't exist, but it was always you, wasn't it? It was always me, he confirmed, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that promised forever. And it was always you I was falling for, Xion. Whether I was the man who was supposed to fire you, or the one who was supposed to save you, my heart didn't care about the script. It only knew you. She squeezed his hand, her answer coming not in a flood of words, but in the simple, unshakable certainty of her gaze. I love you, Long Qing. All of you. The walk back to the hotel was a dream-like haze. The cool night air felt electric on her skin, each city light a glittering promise of their newfound reality. Long Qing kept her hand firmly in his stride confident and purposeful. You won't have to work there anymore, you know, he said casually, his voice carrying over the distant hum of traffic. You won't have to work anywhere if you don't want to. I can give you anything. Xion stopped, turning to face him under the glow of a street lamp. The offer was sweet, a classic line from one of the romance novels she once thought she was controlling. But she wasn't that heroine anymore. She was herself. I appreciate that, she said, her tone gentle but firm. And I love you for it. But I love my job. I love the challenge, the people. I love being a manager. She smiled, a small, confident tilt of her lips. My life isn't just about finding love, Long Qing. It's about building something of my own. I want to be your partner, not your project. He studied her for a long moment, and she saw a flicker of surprise in his eyes, quickly replaced by something deep respect. A slow smile spread across his face, one that reached his eyes and made them shine. A partner, he repeated, as if tasting the word. I like that far better. As they approached the grand entrance of the Starlight Ground Hotel, they were met not with the usual quiet elegance, but with a palpable buzz of energy. The lobby was crowded, staff members were gathered in anxious huddles, their eyes glued to the massive media screen that usually displayed serene landscapes. Reporters with cameras and microphones were being held back by security. At the center of it all stood several stern-faced executives from the Long Corporation's headquarters. What's going on? Xion murmured, her professional instincts kicking in. Longqing simply gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. A surprise. Just then, the screen flickered, and a pre-recorded video began to play. It was an official press conference. On the screen, a man stood at a podium, impeccably dressed, his face the very image of corporate power. It was Longqing. Xianxin's head whipped around to look at the man beside her, then back at the screen in disbelief. The man on the screen was a polished, media-trained CEO. The man beside her was real, his eyes fixed only on her, watching for her reaction. Effective immediately, the on-screen Longqing announced, his voice booming through the lobby's sound system. The Long Corporation is initiating a complete overhaul of the hospitality evaluation sector. The traditional hotel star rating system, a metric that has long stifled innovation and prioritized arbitrary standards over genuine guest experience, is being abolished across all our networks. A collective gasp rippled through the lobby. Xianxian's own breath caught in her throat. Her mission, the 5-star rating that had been the bane of her existence, was suddenly irrelevant. The CEO on the screen continued. This decision was inspired by industry innovators who believe in a more holistic, human-centric approach to hospitality. It is time we reward creativity, heartfelt service, and unique character over outdated checklists. The lobby erupted. Her colleagues were cheering, hugging, some even crying with relief. The pressure that had suffocated them for months had vanished in an instant. But Xion barely heard them. Her gaze was locked with the real Longqing standing beside her. He hadn't just solved her problem. He had taken her principles, her quiet fight against a flawed system, and broadcast them to the world. He had torn down the very structure she was forced to climb. Not just for her, but in honor of her. A profound wave of joy and gratitude washed over her, so potent it made her dizzy. This was a gesture so grand, so ridiculously over the top, that it could only be written in the language of epic romance. But it wasn't fiction, it was real. He leaned in, his lips brushing against her ear, his voice a private whisper amidst the public celebration. Is that a big enough gesture for my partner? She couldn't speak. She could only nod, laughing through a fresh wave of happy tears. He guided her through the jubilant chaos, past the stunned executives and jubilant staff, and into the private elevator that led to the top floor. His office was a space of minimalist elegance, with a floor-to-ceiling window that offered a breathtaking panorama of the city, its light spread out like a carpet of fallen stars. The noise of the lobby faded into a distant murmur. Here, it was just the two of them and the silent, glittering city. He turned her to face him, his hands framing her face with a tenderness that made her heart ache. I couldn't just give you the 5 stars, Xion. That would be playing by the old rules. You deserved a better game, a better world. She finally found her voice. You did all that for me. I did it because you were right, he said simply. You showed me how broken the system was. You made me want to be a man who fixes broken things, not one who just profits from them. He pulled a sleek document from his desk, a contract, but the title wasn't hotel manager. It was head of hospitality innovation, Long Corporation. A partnership, he said, his eyes gleaming with love and promise. In everything, She looked from the contract to his face and saw her entire future reflected in his eyes, a future of love, of respect, of building something new together. She didn't need to read the fine print. She threw her arms around his neck, and her kiss was the only signature required. In the heart of the city he commanded, under the light of 1,000,000 stars, the ordinary hotel manager and the enigmatic president had finally written their own perfect, conclusive ending. The sterile silence of the hotel room was broken by a chime, soft and insidious. A translucent blue panel materialized before Yuxion. It's like painting her face in an artificial glow. System notification. Final offer. A character trait adjustment card has been granted. Modify Long King's core personality to devoted for a 100% success rate. Claim your victory. The words shimmered, a tempting serpent promising an easy end to her ordeal. Just a tap, and he would be hers. Programmed and perfect, a wave of nausea churned in her stomach.